Hey, good morning.
Boker Tov. Today's daf is Sadik Ches and Baba Basra. We learn for Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael and Sum Matzar V'Shivya. Let's look at the Mishnah again at the bottom of Zayin and Beis. Amochi Yain L'Chavero. Reuben sells wine to Shimon, Hichmitz, and it turns sour. And Chai B'Chriyaso says the Tanakama that you're not responsible. The seller's not responsible. We'll see what's the exact nature of the case. The Gemara will describe it. If it's well known that Reuben's wine always turns bad, then no matter what he said, no matter what happened, it's the seller's responsibility. If we tell him I'm selling you good smelling wine, spiced wine, then it's got to last until Shavuos. The Yoshan, if he tells him I'm selling you aged wine, it's got to be a year old. Miyushan, if it's very old, it's very aged, then Mishal Gemasham, it's got to be 3 years old. The Gemara will talk about all these cases. Amar B'Yosef Rav Chanina says the Gemara 3 lines from the top of the page on Daf Tzadik Ches Amar Aleph. Amar B'Yosef Rav Chanina Lo Shano Ela B'Kankan D'Lokech. This is we say that the seller is not responsible if the wine turned bad. It's only if it's in the jars, the jugs of the purchaser of Shimon. Aval B'Kanam D'Mocher. If it's in the jug still of the seller, Amarle, the buyer can tell him, here's your wine, it's your jugs, it's your wine that went bad and it's in your jugs. You can't blame it on me. And therefore the Lokeach is entitled to be reimbursed for the money that he spent. And as he's entitled to give it back and get his money back. Says the Gemara, what if it's the seller's? Let the seller tell the buyer, why did you leave when you bought the wine? You took a taste, you saw it was good, you should have drunk it right away. You left it for a few days. That's your fault. So lo tzricha. No, you're right. It's not necessary in a case like that. The Omerle Mikba. Here it's speaking about where the seller told them, or the buyer told him, and the seller understood, I'm buying it for cooking. Meaning I'm not going to drink it all right now. It's going to be, I'm buying for cooking, I'm only going to use a little bit of a time. So that's the case. So according to Rav Yosef Chanina, the truth is that when do we say that the seller is not responsible? It's only if it's in the jugs of the buyer. So you could say it's your jugs that did it, not my jugs. But if it's in the jugs of the seller, then he has a complaint. You could say you should have drunk it right away. No, it's speaking about where he said, I expect it to last a while. I'm going to use it for cooking. So the Gemara says, why do Yosef say this? Speaking about where it's the jugs of the purchaser. It's speaking about where they made up that it's good. They understood the deal was that it's going to last for a while. I'm buying it for cooking. Look, why don't you just say very simple? The reason that the seller is not responsible is because it's even so it's in the jugs of the mocher. He just said very simple. I'm selling you the wine. You drank it right now. You took a taste. You took it home. Who asked you to wait so long? You should have drunk it right away. Why don't you? Huh? Didn't have an expiration date on it. No, they didn't stamp it. Look for kind of mocher. Just say I didn't expect you to hold on to it for a long time. Just say the seller's not responsible for it to last forever. We had that machlokas before between Rav and Shmuel. Rav said, okay, the seller's responsible for 3 days. Shmuel says the seller's not responsible. It's all the buyer's fault. It's his mazel. So you see, can't be expected to last forever, even according to Rav. So why don't you say speaking about? Why don't you say it's speaking where it was the jugs of the buyer, and he told him they made up it's going to last for a while. I'm going to use it for cooking. Say it's the jugs of the seller, and he didn't say they didn't make up anything about cooking. Expected it to drink it right away. The reason, or Rabbi Yosef Chanina says that speaking about where it was the jugs of the buyer. The jugs of the buyer. The reason why the seller's not responsible is because the jugs of the buyer, and it should have lasted. And the reason is, even if it was the jugs of the seller could have said you should have waited. No, they talk about they're talking about where they said it's going to last for a while. I'm going to use it for cooking. Oh, so if it's going to be used for cooking, it should have lasted. So why isn't the seller responsible? Because it was in the jugs of the buyer. But had it been in the jugs of the seller, then the seller would have been responsible. But why do you have to say the case like that? Just say, speaking about the jugs of the seller, and he didn't say it's for cooking, so he should have drunk it right away. The reason Rabbi Yosef couldn't learn the Mishnah is because it was difficult in this part. It says afterwards in the Mishnah, If it's known that Ruvain's wine always goes bad, then it's a bad deal. Then the deal is a mistake. It's the whole thing is refundable, returnable, because it was done under false understanding. So then he's always responsible. Why? Even if it's known that the seller's wine always goes bad, why do you say it's mektos? Let the seller tell them. You tasted it in the store. Take it home and drink it. What are you telling me after a few days it's no good? What are you talking about? Should have drunk it right away anyway. Even why do you say it's a mektos if it's known that the seller's wine goes bad? It goes bad after a while, but it wasn't bad when you tasted it. We must be speaking about the reason why we say that if it's known that the seller's wine goes bad, then it's the seller's responsibility, is because he told them it's going to last for a while. He didn't expect him to drink the wine, right? So you see our Mishnah speaking about where he told him it's going to last for a while. If it's going to last for a while, and if it was in the seller's jugs, then the seller should be responsible. Says Rabbi Yosef the reason the seller's not responsible is because it's in the buyer's jugs. This, Rabbi Yosef says, disagrees with Pliga to Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef doesn't learn that way at all. Wine, if it goes good or bad, it's what we say a crapshoot. When it comes to wine, you don't know how it's going to work out. So we say it depends on the mazel of the owner. In this case, it's the buyer. Shenemar. Pasuk says in Chavakuk, Afki ayayin boge, even the wine is the one that that's boged, that betrayal, that betrays. The wine betrays. Gever yahir v'lo yinva, the pasuk says, a man who is arrogant and nobody listens to, nobody he's not abided by anybody. What do we mean that wine is boged? Rashbam explains like this: a man who is arrogant and says things that aren't true. He's arrogant and he says, I have these things that I don't really have. His own wine betrays him, because if he had good wine, the wine turns bad. As if to say, meat, Rashbam says it's since chometz mida keneged miga. Since he is arrogant and takes pride in something that he doesn't have, so his own wine also turns out that he doesn't have. It turns his wine betrays him. So the point is this: that a person who's arrogant, it depends on the person. Your wine could be good, but if you're arrogant and you claim to have houses and money and all kinds of things, or you're learned, whatever arrogance you have, your own wine will betray you, because your own wine will turn bad, as if to say you don't have what you say you have. Amar Mari Haiman to Yor, if a person who's arrogant, a person who is arrogant is not even tolerated by his own family. Shnemar Gever Yor v'lo yinve. A man who is arrogant v'lo yinve will not be abide my v'lo yinve b'nevei shalo, even in his own abode. Neva is a lotion of nevei kotchachas. We'll see, right? It's your own abode. You're not even going to be accepted. A person who's arrogant, even his own family doesn't care for him. But the point Rabbi Yosef says is that it all depends on the buyer. So even if it's Rabbi Yosef said that, the reason the seller's not responsible in the Mishnah is because it's the buyer's jugs, and he told him it's going to last for a while, but it's the buyer's jugs, so he could claim it on him. That's when it says no. Even if it was the seller's jugs, it's too bad. It's the mazel of the buyer that caused him to have this problem. Rashbam says, Rashbam. It could even be the seller's jugs. Even though I said it's going to last for a while. Why? It's one thing if it's known that the seller's wine always goes bad, right? Then he can't say. Still, he's part of the Talmud. He can't say this is your wine. It's because it's even. It's the mazel of lokech that caused it to happen, unless it's known that his wine goes bad. So Rabbi Chanina learns one way, that the Mishnah speaking about was the buyer's jugs, and that's why the seller's not responsible. Rav Chia Bar Yosef learns no. Even if it was the seller's jugs, as long as it wasn't known that the seller's wine always goes bad, it's the buyer's tough luck, because it's the buyer's mazel, not the seller, that caused the problem to happen. The person takes arrogance, is arrogant, is haughty in the wearing the talis of a Talmid Chacham, meaning he dresses like a Talmid Chacham. He's a big famous rabbi. He dresses like him. He's got the kapot with the two buttons in the back, and even though he's in garnish and whatever, he just acts like a big shot. So he's falsely presenting himself. He's not allowed. He's not allowed into the partition of Hashem. It says below Yinba, person who's arrogant will not be abided. Again, to your holy abode. So that's the idea that a person who is arrogant. So we see the Pashup shot is like, or one shot was Rav Meir said this, that he's not even accepted in his own house. And this shot is that he's not even, if he's arrogant and presents himself as a rabbi when he's not, then he will not be able to enter Hashem's partition. Amarava, the first of the wide lines of the Gemara. A man gave, let's say the vintner gave a barrel of wine, a jug of wine to a shopkeeper. And in this case, he gave it to him what we call on consignment. He said, basically, I'm giving you the wine. It's my wine. You sell it. And as you sell it, you'll get a commission for every pint or whatever it is that you sell. So I'm on the for the shopkeeper to sell at retail. And the buyer would only, and the shopkeeper would only take a commission. The talk of apago atilsa, and the wine turned sour when half was left or a third was left. Dinu de makabale mine, the seller has to accept the situation. In other words, it's the seller's. Why? Because the seller didn't sell it to the buyer. In a case where he bought it, so we say, like Rav Shapiro also says, it's the mazel of the buyer. Over here, he didn't sell it to him. He just gave it to him on consignment. As you sell it, you'll take a commission. So if it went bad, it wasn't the buyer's fault. So that's what we say over here. Rashbam says that the din of the makab, the baal bayis has to accept the loss, and assuming that the shopkeeper was not negligent in any way, right? He wasn't negligent. If he was negligent, then it's his fault. And the Gemara goes on to explain below Amran. This we say that the seller has to accept it because he's the wholesaler, the vintner. It was his wine. That's only if the shopkeeper didn't change the tap, the bung hole. In other words, they would have a jug, right? Today we think of a wooden barrel or casket or whatever, a cask. But whatever the jug was, you have to put a tap in there. He says if the shopkeeper changed the tap, then it could be his fault because he might have done something to it. I will show you, but if he changed it, if he switched the tap, then the owner is not responsible anymore. That's only if the market day hasn't come yet. If the market day has come, then it was the shopkeeper's negligence for not selling out all the wine by then. So if it's come already and it hasn't been sold, and then the wine turned bad, then it's the shopkeeper's fault. Another case. A man accepted wine on the condition. This is what we call an iska, where it was like a half a loan and half a picadon. And he said, here's the condition. The owner said to him, here, take the barrel of wine to the Parvasa de Val Shafat. That was the name. It was the port of Val Shafat. That was a famous wine market. And he says, take it there, and that's where you'll get a good price. And we'll split the profits. Before he got there, the price went down. So Dinu the Makabale, the price went down. It's the owner's fault. It's the owner has to accept that upon himself. Rashbam says like this. Take a look at the Rashbam. Dinu, about 10, 12 lines from the bottom page. Dinu Makabal Balayayin as Kolazol. Even if the price had gone up, the agent was not eligible to sell it. The deal was take it to the port of Al Shafat. You got to sell it over there at the market. So he couldn't have sold it before. In other words, it wasn't like it was his fault, his responsibility. He was told not to sell it until you get to that port, to the port of Al Shafat. And if he couldn't say, by the time he got there, the price went down. It's not his fault. It's still his responsibility because it was like a half discount. We'll split the profit, so they're like partners. Come on. In other words, if something turned bad, then we'll see. So if the price went down, it's certainly not his fault. The Gemara now asks 3 lines from the bottom page of the Gemara. What happens if it turned to sour, turned to vinegar? by the time he got there. What would you say there? So two different opinions. Amalei Rav Hillel Ravashi, Kiavin Bei Rav Kana, when we were at the yeshiva of Kana, Amarlan Chalalo. No, if it's Udlok Rabbi Yosef Chanina, meaning if it turned bad, then we don't say like Rabbi Yosef Chanina, who says what, that if it's in the seller's jugs, it's the seller's fault. We don't say that. Here he gave him the wine in the jugs and he said, take it to that place. If the price went down, then it's not the agent's fault because he wasn't allowed to sell till then. But if it turned to vinegar, then it's not the owner's responsibility, but it's the agent's responsibility, his responsibility. Some say, even if it turned bad, makabel, come on, it goes like Chanina. But the first opinion was not like Chanina, that you look at whose jugs it was, and in this case, it wasn't. It was the jugs of the owner who sold it to him, who gave it to the agent to take to the port. So therefore, if it turned bad, even though it was the jugs of the owner, there were only jugs. There was no buyer. He was an agent. Even if it was in the owner's jugs, the agent is responsible for it. Rashbam says at the bottom of the page, 2 lines from the bottom of the page in Rashbam, the halacha is like Rav Chanina, that what we depend on, we say that it depends on whose jugs it was. Elik Rabbi Yosef, who said that even if it's the seller's jugs, it's the buyer's tough luck. The mazla de gavra garam. Elim ken yadua, unless it was known, unless you known that the seller's wine always turns bad. Well, I mean, he told them it's going to last for a while. You can use it for cooking, and it was known that it went bad. Then it's the seller's fault. Why do we say that it's always the buyer's fault? That's the halacha. The Shmuel koi kavase. Shmuel went like this Mishnah, as we explained before. Shmuel said before that if you sold wine, even if it went back right away, Shmuel says, Hamra kispa demari shaber. At the top of Tzadik Bavam days we had the other day, that the wine leaps onto the shoulders of its owner. Shmuel koi kavase. Rashbam says, Rav Yosef did a paskin when it comes to wine, like Shmuel. So it depends on who the owner is. So the only way the seller is responsible is if the only way he's responsible is if it's known that the seller's wine always goes bad. But if it's not known that the seller's wine always goes bad, even though he told him that it's going to last for a while, doesn't make any difference. It's the buyer's fault because it was his mazel that caused the wine to go bad. Yashim Mishal Shteka, the last couple of words on Sadik Chesam and Alpha Gemara. Yashim Mishal Shteka. Let's say he told him, I'm selling you aged wine. It's got to be from a year before. Tana umiyashen v'holacharachag. If it's really going on the miyushan. If it's very aged, very aged means it's got to last until Sukkot, 3 full years. Rashbam says. Tana Rashbam at the top of the page. Miyushan. When he told him, I'm going to give you very aged wine, so shall gimel shanim mishlam. It's got to be 3 full years old. It's got to last for 3 full years. Out of butzer until the harvest. Shazui taras miyushim. The skaim shal shanim shlam. It's got to be 3 full years. In other words, if I'm selling you very aged wine, it's got to last 3 full years. If it lasts 2 years and 11 months, no good. And the seller's responsible.
He knew his grandfather's business.
Yeah, he knew the business. Yeah. All right. Yeah. He says in several places with Cheney that he learned this one. He doesn't quote his father much, but he quotes his grandfather, Rashi, a lot. Yeah. Says the Mishnah. What's always the problem here? When things aren't clear, right? You just said, okay, I'm selling you wine. If I say age, that's clear. Very aged, that's very clear. If I sell you for cooking, it's going to last for a while, right? Or maybe not. Depends on the situation. We have this machlokes. What about if I says I'm selling you a place, selling you an abode, a living space? What we call here in Hebrew a yechidat diur, right? A unit. They have a unit. They added on a unit, for a young couple to sleep in. So amochar makam lechavero. The Mishnah said the Bach says amochar makam lechavero lechaver lasos lo bais chasos lo to make a wedding room. Let's call it a wedding bedroom for his son, or based on labita, or a room for his daughter, who's now an almana. We'll see why it's called that. If she turned to be an almana, so she comes back home. In other words, the assumption was in those days when they would get married, they would live in the father-in-law's house, right? The father-in-law, meaning the father of the chassan. They would go to the father of the chassan usually would make a room for them. That's what you mean over here. So he contracted with somebody to make a room. Either he sold him a room. I'll sell you a room for your young couple. Told this to the father of the groom. Or the Mishnah goes on, or he accepted, he took a kablan, he contracted with somebody with a kablan to build one for him. And he didn't say the measurements. He just said, "Gonna buy an apartment? Okay, I'll buy an apartment." He didn't say anything. How many rooms? Does it have a bathroom? Nothing. Just said, "I'm gonna say, what's the deal then?" Again, he saw him for either a wedding bedroom for the young couple or a room for if his daughter, who had now lived with her husband in the father-in-law's next to the father-in-law's house, and now she became an almana, she has got to come back home, so she needs a room now too. What about the room that she had before when she was single? Apparently, that room was already taken. So either we'll see why it's called a wedding bedroom for his son. No, why not for his daughter? We'll see. Or a house where if she's an almana, a room for her, for his daughter, if she comes back home now. What are the dimensions if you didn't specify them? So bona arba amos al sheish. It's got to be 4 amos al sheish. And that was roughly about 2 feet. So it's a pretty small room, right? It's like 8 by 12, a small 8 by 12 feet, a small room. That's what Rabbi Kiva says. Rabbi Kiva says that's the measurement. That's the minimum measurement for a bedroom for this couple. Tomorrow we'll talk about why do you talk about a base chasnas for the son and almanas for the daughter? Why not both? We'll see why in the Gemara. So that's what Rabbi Kiva says. Shmuel Omer says that's a bedroom. Refes Bucker, that's a cow shed. That's very small. You expect 2 people to live in a room like that, in one room? Then the Mishnah goes on, the first of the wide lines of the Gemara. Rotza lasos refes Bucker. If you want to make a cow shed, then bonadalat amos al sheish. That's 4 by 6. So we'll see, is that Rabbi Shmuel talking or Rabbi Kiva? The Gemara is going to have 2 different opinions. Let's say he said, I'm contracting or I'm going to buy a small house. He didn't say base chasnas for his young couple or for his almana daughter. He said a small house. How big does that have to be? Sheish al ches, 6 by 8, a little bit bigger. Gadol, a big house, ches by es, a ches al eser, 8 by 10, an 8 by 10. Traklin, a hall, yud al yud, it's got to be 10 by 10. These are different measurements for a stam, by say stam, by his cotton, by his gadol, traklin, whatever. Rumo, kachatzi, arko, chasigo. How high does it have to be? Those are the dimensions, the length and the width. How high does it have to be? So it has to be half of the total of the height and of the length and width. You take the length and the width together. So in any of these cases, let's say you talk about the first dimension where he's going to build the base chasnas lebno or base almanas for his daughter. And we say it's 4 by 6. 4 by 6, 4 plus 6 is 10. Half of 10 is 5. 5 would be the height. That's what we mean over here. It's got to be. That's how high it has to be. Rumo kachatzi or kachatzi rachbo. Okay, where do we get this from? Raya Ladava. Where do you see this idea where that the dimensions, the height has to be half of the total of the length and the width, half of the sum of the total of the length and the width. The heichal was built that way, as we'll see in the Gemara. The heichal on the base of Megiddo was 40 length by 20 width, 40 by 20. 40 plus 20 is how much? 60. Half of that is 30. That was the height of the heichal. So he says you see it from there. Now we'll see the Gemara to describe all these things. And in case you're wondering, maybe that's for a big building like a hall or a barge house or small house, even for the refes bakar or for the bedroom for his young couple. So Rashbam in the first of the wide lines, and the Rashbam says akulukoi. It's going on all of them. In other words, these dimensions that we talk about, that the height has to be half of the sum of the length and the width. That's on all these cases. Says the Gemara. Lamali lemisne base chasos lebno base. So why do you talk about it's a wedding bedroom for my son, or almanas rachmanas son for his daughter? If daughter became widowed, listen to base chasos lebno bito. It's a wedding room for the son or the daughter. Why do you say that when they get married, they're going to live by the near the groom's father? Maybe they'll live near the groom, near the bride's father. Based on lebno ulabito, just say it's for both of them. So Milsaga Borcha teaches us something. It's not proper for a son-in-law to live near the mother-in-law's house. When your daughter gets married, it's not proper for the son-in-law to move in with near the parents, because there's always a chash, and maybe he'll have his eyes on the mother-in-law. Seems strange, but it can happen, right? It's not proper to live there. So that's the idea they're teaching over here, that a man builds a bedroom for his son and daughter-in-law, because they would live there, right? And the daughter-in-law and his daughter, who now moved in by her father-in-law, by the groom's father, if she becomes widowed, then she'll have to move back to her father's house. So it's normal for the almana to be in her own father's house. That's what he says based on us for his daughter, and the groom's father would build a bedroom for his son and daughter-in-law. How do we see that? Ben Seir is a sefer that has many good pieces of advice. I weighed everything in a balanced scale. I never found anything nothing is light, meaning as degrading or as bad as misubin. Subin is bran. In other words, like of all the foods, that's the worst. That's the garbage, chaff, whatever. The kalmisum, what's lighter than that or worse than that? It's a groom who lives in his father-in-law's house, because he shouldn't be near his mother. But what's worse than that? If you have a guest and he brings in another guest, you're a guest. Don't start bringing us. What's worse than that? When you answer too quickly, you answer before you heard the question. If you answer something before you heard the question, it's a folly for him, and it's an embarrassment. It's a disgrace, a shame. Rabbi Shmuel said, Rabbi Shmuel said to Rabbi Kiva, what do you mean? You're going to build a bedroom for your kids 4x6? That's a cow shed, an ox stall, zoo. So and then Gemara, then Mishnah goes on. If you want to make a refes bakar, that's not a 4x6. So refes bakar magtanila. Who talked about refes bakar? Who said that refes bakar is 4x6? Some say it's Rabbi Shmuel tanila. Rabbi Kiva tanila. Some say it was Rabbi Shmuel. Said someone was Rabbi Kiva. Rabbi Kiva tanila. Right? Rabbi Shmuel said to him, "What are you talking about? That's 4x6." Rabbi Kiva says, "You know what? I'll teach refes bakar. Even though that's the mentions of refes bakar." Sometimes you make a small bedroom the size of an ox stall. Nothing wrong with that. So when it says over here, Rabbi Shmuel said, "Oh, refes bakar." Then the Mishnah went on to say the first of the Y lines of the Gemara, "Arotza lasus refes bakar." You can build it. Maybe Rabbi Kiva says, "Enachanami." You can make a refes bakar. You can make a house. Or you can. Some say Rabbi Shmuel Tani Rabbi Shmuel said, "What are you talking about? You're going to build a bedroom 4x6? That's an ox stall. If you want to make a refes bakar, so according to this pshat, Rabbi Shmuel didn't really say how big the bedroom should be. He just said when Rabbi Kiva said it's 4x6, Rabbi Shmuel said 4x6. That's an ox stall. That's not for a bedroom for people. So it must be. He held that the bedroom was much bigger, but he didn't really say how much it should be. And according to this, Rabbi Kiva didn't really say how much a refes bakar should be. He just said that a bedroom could be 4x6. A refes bakar maybe it was smaller. If you want to build a traklin, it's got to be. If he just said stam traklin, it's got to be 10x10. My traklin, kufsa bebardi. It's an arch tall adorned with roses. Tani the kantir. What's a kantir? That's even nicer. Shtei misrei al shtei misrei. 12x12. My kantir tarbetz apadni. It's the forecourt of a mansion. It's even bigger. So he said the height's got to be half of the sum of the length and width. Could be an eichel. Who said Rayel Davar? Proof there. Some say Rabbi Shmuel Tanila, but that Rabbi Shmuel said Rayel Davar. What's the proof? You're right that it's got to be half of the sum of the length and width. Minayin. How do we know? Hakol means like you learn it from the heichel. Some say what? That it was a Tanakama. Tanakama said it's got to be. The height has to be half of the sum of the length and width. And Rayel Davar, he starts saying the proof is, Rabbi Shmuel says what? Atmur Kamatam was asking Kasha, like he butted in and he said, what do you mean? You're going to bring a proof from the Heichel? Raya Minayin, Meheichel, you're going to prove from the Heichel. Atu Kol Yama could be in Heichel Abdi. What do you, everybody has to build like the Heichel? The Heichel was a Choshev building, right? So that's got to have a high A high ceiling, half of the sum of the length and width. But everybody who's building a little shack or a little room or whatever, a small house has to build that way too. Shmuel argued with the Tanakh. Tanya Chayram, some say the height has to be the size of the beams that run across the width of the room. Why do you have to say it's got to be the size of the beams? The beams run across the width. So just say the height has to be like the width of the building. So anybody saying no, not necessarily so, because the beams are actually longer than the width, because when they build a structure, especially out of stone, the stones at the top they make narrower so that the building should be stable. So at the top, the beams are longer than the width at the bottom of the room. The reason is because the beams have to fit into the holes in the wall to hold it up. So therefore the beams may be a little longer. So he says that the height has to be like the size of the beams, not necessarily the width. Rav Shapiro went out to the country. They asked him to steal the psukim. It says, Shlomo, the house that Shlomo built, Lashem, Shishim Ama Orchto, Shishim Esrim Rachbo. It says 60 by 20. And 30 its height. Exhibit says, before the Dvir, which was the Kache Kachim, Esrim Ama Orach, 20, Esrim Ama Rachbo, 20 by 20, Esrim Ama Kamoso, the height was only 20. We just said that the height was 30. Here you're saying that the height was only 20. Amar Lahu, he answered him, this Rav Chanina, when he says the height in the Dvir was 20, he doesn't mean that the total height from the floor. It means from the height of the top of the kruvim. The kruvim that we'll talk about tomorrow in detail were 10 amas from the floor. The height was 10 amas from the floor. From there to the ceiling was 20. So the total was 30. What's the chiddush in that? My kamashmalan lamata kum lamala. Above the kruvim was just like with the bottom was just like above. Mala aim mishamishkum, just like above them. There was nothing above the kruvim at all. It was empty. Aflamata aim mishamishkum. Below the kruvim was also nothing, as we'll see tomorrow. This proves that the kruvim took up no space physically. It was a miracle that the kruvim and the aron took no physical space. In other words, there was 10 amos on each side. The whole width was 20. There was 10 amos on each side. What about the kruvim? Took up no space. How did that work? It's miraculously. We'll see that tomorrow, Mitzvah. Have a good day, everybody. Call to tomorrow, regular time.